Hi, I'm Professor Alexandre Pacheco da Silva. I'm a law professor here at the FGV Direito SP, and I'm here with Professor Kees Stuurman, and he's a professor from Tilburg University, and he's here to conduct a course in our global law program regarding introduction to legal aspects of technical standards and standardization in the field of information technology. And one of the things that I would like to ask the professor to start our conversation today is about what's the importance regarding standards in legal practice.
Thank you, Alexander. Yeah, I'll be happy to reflect on that. The interesting thing is that if you look at legal practice, and myself, I'm an example of a law and technology practitioner, that you do not come across legal or technical standards immediately. You will see them sometimes, like security standards we can see around cloud contracting or outsourcing, but they're not so visible actually. And only in specific cases you will actually encounter them. So one of the interesting topics also with my double role as an academic and a practitioner is that I think from an academic point of view that the topic is hugely important. But if you respond to it on practitioners level, then they would say, well, we can do to a large extent without it. Which is true, but nevertheless it's of growing importance. So I still think that it's important to pay attention to it in the academic setting. But there's not such a strong drive from practice, unless you're, for instance, in the patent litigation, in which standardization and patent problems are related. We might talk about it later on maybe. But otherwise, like in contracting, there's a minimal appearance of technical standard.
The second question that I would like to actually ask you about is regarding what extent do you think that standards should be included in the law school's curriculum?
Yeah, I think it should be a much more important topic than it is right now. I don't claim to have an overview of all law school curriculum, but to my knowledge it's a very limited attention given to it. Sometimes in relation to intellectual property, maybe trade law, contract law a little bit. But I think that over time, and especially with the development of the information society, technical standards have become much more important as a regulatory tool. And by the way, I'd like to avoid the impression that it's only relating to high technologies, because in Europe there's a very strong example of the use of standards from a regulatory point of view that was already implemented in the 1980s with regard to traditional tangible products. And it's called the European New Approach, and it was called upon in a time when Europe wants to reach one union, one single market by 1992. But the production of regulations fell short. And then in the mid-1980s, the politicians came up with the idea to restrict the political decision makings until high standards like legal standards like the product is safe or it's environmental friendly, and then ask the private sector, so the standardization bodies, to come up with technical standards. And if a product complies with those technical standards, then it is presumed to be safe, presumed to be environmental friendly, etc. So that was already a very powerful tool, and I think that has been the breakthrough in speeding up European legislation for that single market reached in 1992. So it is not a new instrument and not only high-tech related, but we can see that the justification for applying it in the 1980s have returned to some extent. We are confronted with very fast-moving technologies. And of course, in a democratic society, lawmaking, we pay a price in terms of time. 2-3 years for new legislation, and in that time the technology has changed already a lot. So the idea that the legislator would restrict itself to high-level standards like safety again or security, and then leave it up to the market, the standardization bodies, to come up with standards is very current and a very powerful tool to maintain safety, security, etc. But on the other hand, also ensure that there's still democratic oversight on the higher level. So that's why I think that standardization is important. And I think that not only the law and technology lawyers, but all lawyers actually should be aware of the importance of this instrument, especially when standardization now also moves away from pure hardware-related aspects like safety or electronical engineering, but it also touches upon ethical issues like data protection, security of data. And if we imagine that we move into the area of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, then it becomes clear that there also need to be an adequate oversight and an adequate understanding of this whole column of private lawmaking, which actually you could standardization label as such. So I do think that is very important in the curriculum, but I also do realize that it requires some public relations for the topic and some conviction of people responsible for. But I hope also that the course that I give here also contributes to the idea that this is an important topic.
Great. And in our final question, I'd like to ask you, consider that you are a law professor, considering that you are an attorney in Holland, in one of the biggest law offices in your country. What would be a good advice for not only young lawyers, but lawyers in Brazil that need to deal with European companies, and especially in the topic of standards?
Yeah, well, I think it's important, if you are from a Brazilian lawyer perspective dealing with European clients, that you understand from which regulatory environment they actually come. So that you have some understanding, at least a high level understanding of the way the regulations work in Europe, so in which environment the companies operate, and how they are working also with standards, in order to understand them and also be able to find similar solutions if they move to other countries like Brazil. So some orientation of European law and the way technology regulation is developing in Europe would be, I think, an asset.